Hello everyone, my name is Kai and I recently shared my 2024 graduation film Noxious here on YouTube. I'm still completely blown away by the positive response it has been getting, and I'm incredibly grateful for all of the kind messages. I even called my mom to tell her that I hit over 1,000 likes on YouTube. I was so hesitant to release this film at first because all I could see were the flaws. But after stepping away from it, I realized I'm actually proud of what I managed to pull off, technically and artistically. And the project doesn't do any good just sitting on a hard drive somewhere. In this video, I want to break down the entire project. I'll explain the philosophy behind it, share some of the 2D to 3D pipelines that I developed, talk about the intense project breakdown that happened that almost caused this project to completely stop, and I hopefully leave you inspired for your own projects. There's a lot to share, so I have added timestamps on the video if you want to revisit a topic or just want to skip around. I'm also incredibly excited to share that Mikael will be joining on this video to give an inside look into how the music and sound design was developed for this film. Before we get into the chaos of this production, we have to go back to where this obsession began. For a very long time, I have been fascinated by the mix of 2D and 3D animation. Before university, I was making small animation loops on Instagram, constantly challenging myself using different shading techniques, all in Cinema 4D back then. Once I got accepted into the HKU, I leaned hard into this, experimenting with different techniques on NPR or non-physically based rendering. I was searching for a specific hack where I could take a model and view it from any angle while still maintaining an illustrative look. But during all of that extensive research, I actually came full circle. I realized something that feels incredibly relevant today. For an image to truly look hand-drawn, it actually has to originate from a real human-drawn source, rather than letting the computer just generate an image or a filter over some generic 3D model. Two specific modules during my study shaped this mindset. In my first year, we had to close off with our first short film, and I entirely focused there on giving it a hand-painted feel. By my second year, during the experimental module, I finally realized that instead of building the set with all of the microscopic details everywhere, wasn't as strong of an image compared to building the world from the perspective of the camera. By locking down a specific camera viewpoint, I could focus much more on the composition and the details that mattered, which were in front, and everything that was further back could be abstracted, just like an illustrator would. This kept the emphasis exactly where it mattered, instead of scattering the details everywhere in your scene. With all that technical research and growth as an artist myself during the study, I finally came to the final year, where I had to decide what did I want to create for my graduation project. Before entering the official research phase of the project, I already had some idea in mind about maybe a character going through a forest and being absolved by nature. But the more I reflected on my past work and my interests, I realized that a fully character-driven animation wasn't really fit for me, and so I really wanted to focus on environments. I was deeply inspired by graduation films that would really focus on their world building and storytelling through the environment. After all, I wanted to graduate as a visual artist and art director, rather than a script writer or a character animator. So I went back to my original realization that I wanted to focus on translation of 2D to 3D because that was really my interest. Conceptually, I took a lot of inspiration from two short films that heavily relied on world building. One of them is Scavengers by Joseph Bennett and Charles Hutner, and the other film is called Playground, which is like a concept trailer which was made by Rodrigo Sosa. I hope I'm not butchering that name. Both introduce the viewer to an unknown or alien world governed by their own rules. And that became the foundation for Noxious. I wanted to take the viewer on a journey through a world where the story is told entirely through the environment. I envisioned an alternate timeline where humanity is completely disconnected from nature, and then nature takes back what was once theirs and sort of reclaims their world. The film structure is meant to mirror this evolution where you begin with almost no nature and then end up with a screen full of green. I purposely left the ending open to interpretation. Is this a hopeful new beginning or a dark omen? To bring this world to life, my research phase had to answer both technical and design questions. Before figuring out the look of the world, I needed to know if my drawing skills were up to par. I knew I could translate loose sketches into 3D, but for Noxious, the illustrations had to be the final visual guide. I got really inspired by the illustrations of Alarico. Their style really matched my vision for the architecture. To practice light and form, I started out with reference photos. I just used those and tried to recreate them, and in that process, sort of find my own style. Once I became comfortable with the brushwork, I realized that perspective was a bit of a bottleneck for me. So I tried a new workflow. I blocked out some shapes in 3D first and then used that as a basis to draw over. For me, this was an absolute game changer because I could use that as a great reference for perspective. And then if I needed to translate that back into 3D later on, I already had something that had a similar layout. So the goal was to bring this 2D illustration back into 3D so that the camera could fly around it smoothly while maintaining that illustrative look. I investigated two different techniques, the first one being simple camera projection mapping. Around the same time, I watched the documentary Bridging the Rift, which is about the creation of Netflix's Arcane. And there's this famous scene where they talk about how they achieved their look, which is basically just painting and then projecting that back onto 3D geometry. I also found a brilliant breakdown by Lightning Boy Studio, who sort of tried to match that style using Blender, which is a great source, so I really recommend it if you want to try that technique out. So my first tests revolved around this projection mapping technique, where I had made an illustration, and based on that, I would just project that straight from the camera view onto the mesh. While it was a really fast workflow, the camera was very restricted. Like, I couldn't move it too much or everything would already break, especially the line work, which was a deal breaker for me because I wanted that to feel consistent everywhere. So for my second test, I went for a bit more of a complicated pipeline. I separated the line work from the shading and the shading from the colors. And then what I did was I still did the projection mapping technique, but this time only on the colors. And I used the shading, which was just simple shadows from Blender itself. And then I used Blender's grease pencil outline modifier to then automatically generate outlines around objects. So this would make round objects also look a lot better. And then for the scribbles that were on the surface of these objects, I used a curve tool to then draw those curves on the surfaces and then let the grease pencil modifier turn those curves into actual lines. And now the reason that I used curves then was because back then you couldn't combine geometry nodes with grease pencil yet, and I needed geometry nodes because sometimes I wanted to have control over how much the lines were offsetted from the surface, and I wanted that to be procedural in case that I would get flickering issues later on, and I didn't want to have to redraw those lines over and over again until they got the right distance. Then another important aspect to have more freedom for the camera was that I baked that projected color map into separated UVs for the meshes that were scattered around in the scene. And then what I could do is fill in the spaces that were not having any correct colors yet. This was kind of based off that Lightning Boy Studio tutorial, but more in line with what I was in need for. When choosing the setting, I wanted to draw something that would serve the story, but also would be inspiring enough for me to draw because I knew I was going to have to draw a lot. I realized I had a massive affinity for those industrial landscapes from the 19th or 20th century. Think dready tones and rusty iron, towering factory chimneys. It proved to be a nice contrast to the unstoppable nature in my film. To maximize this industrial feeling and to make it a little bit more exaggerated, I decided on stacking a lot of those factories on top of each other and making them extremely large, creating like an endless, suffocating cityscape, almost like as if the Industrial Revolution never stopped and it just always stayed within that era. This sense of monumental scale was actually inspired by a movie I watched as a kid. It was called The King and the Mockingbird, which features a staggeringly high castle built of endless towering layers of architecture. During pre-production, I heavily focused on those exterior facades. I knew I wanted to make this abandoned world convincing, so you see a lot of chimneys and there's no smoke coming out. And I even had some early concept illustrations of like humans getting covered by vines. However, visualizing the invasive nature of this ecosystem proved to be my toughest challenge. My early drawings of overgrown elements felt a bit messy, and I wanted to improve that. Looking for a breakthrough, I came across an artist known online as Dirty Iron. His art perfectly captured what I was looking for. He often had illustrations where you would see an sort of aggressive alien organic-like mass that would be consuming the environment. I was trying to then sort of translate that feel into my own work, but it was still feeling a bit off. So I sat down with one of my tutors, and during a discussion we had a major realization. I was paying too much attention to the end results of the work of other artists instead of looking at what they might have been inspired by. I was sort of copying from a copy. So this completely changed my approach. I started taking reference photos of nature sort of reclaiming things in real life, or looking at unique tree bark structures or certain patterns that would interest me. And then even though I didn't implement all of these elements into the initial illustrations for the pre-production, they did become a very nice asset library that I then used as reference during the production of the film. So with a locked-in camera 2D to 3D pipeline locked in, and a nice visual direction for the industrial world, and the beginning of an idea for the ecosystem, the pre-production phase wrapped up and I had the blueprint and it was time to actually build it. I started out with sketching a storyboard. It started really rough, just trying different scenarios until I got something that I was happy with. There was a lot of back and forth with tutors, getting feedback on things that might work and might not. Then I also wanted to bring one of the shots fully through the pipeline so that I knew that it was working. So I took this shot of the opening of the film because I knew that was going to stay. So I started out with a sketch and then I blocked it out in 3D, did a little bit of lighting for the shadow, then I brought it back into Photoshop and I started to draw all of the details and the colors and then brought it back to Blender. And once that was nicely projected, I added in all of the line details and I rendered it with a bunch of different layer passes, and then I combined all of that inside of After Effects for compositing. So I got the pipeline working and I was really happy with how I went from storyboard to final image. And then I wanted to work a little bit more on that ecosystem or the nature that was being shown in the film, because I knew I wanted that to not only look cool, but I also wanted to have some sort of logic in the biology that was happening. The reason I wanted that was because right around that time, the show Scavenger's Reign got released, and I was just completely blown away by how they managed to show those alien ecosystems and just the biology that was happening either between animals or the nature, the plants. So I wanted to delve deeper for my own biology. To pull this off, I reached out to an ecologist. He helped me intensely, where we would analyze sketches and bring up ideas that would make the logic of these plants attacking the humans and what would happen after make a lot more sense to me. So when I would actually display these plants, there would be some sort of logic behind them. There were actually a lot of different type of plants that we wanted to have in the film, but eventually I had to cut that down, but I'll get to that in a moment. So with all of the research done and logic locked in for the biology as well, it was time to get into production. In my drive to make this film flawless, I set an impossibly high and unreachable standard for myself. I crunched so hard working days and nights that I eventually got physically ill. It culminated in a terrifying moment where I actually blacked out and ended up in the hospital. Thankfully, I was okay, but it was a massive, sobering wake-up call. It was a brutal confrontation with my own limits. I had to be realistic, or this film was gonna break me. So right then and there, I decided to almost cut my shot list in half. And I also realized that to save this film, I couldn't do it completely alone. I needed some help from others. So I brought on some help from other talented students. To assist with some additional 3D modeling, Leonie created a beautiful illustration for one of the shots, and I had Tobias and Sus create some beautiful simulations. I just simply had no time to do any research or development for any fluid or claw simulation that was needed for the film to simulate the slime and the flowers opening up. So as I continued to work on the film, there was one very important element that also continued throughout production, and that was music and sound design. And thankfully, I had the help of Mikael to make some beautiful music and sound design for this film. To show you how that auditorial landscape was built, I'm going to give the mic to Mikael to talk a little bit about how that was made. Take it away, Mikael.
Hi everyone, my name is Mikael Umarov. I composed the score and did the sound design for Noxious. Kai and I started talking about the soundscape pretty early on in its production. We didn't really have the animatic yet. There were just some images to go off of and some beautiful artwork that Kai made in isolation. That was, from my understanding, the root of this entire film and the idea of it. We definitely knew that for this film we didn't want something very one-sided, where it seems, like a doomy end of the world type of feeling. We wanted something that catches the complexity of having this beautiful nature and something humans would perceive as a beauty, right, which is nature itself. And on the other side you have humanity and the industrialization that you can especially see in the prologue, right? You can kind of that kind of sets the tone of how humanity is depicted in this film specifically. To do that, or to capture that in a musical form, I resorted to having two parts of instrumentalizations. So the first one would be a very natural, grounded one with, actual instruments, mainly the piano and the string section. And those are supposed to depict the, perceived beauty of nature. And then on the other side, we have very heavily processed synthesizers, which are supposed to depict the humans. So we have these two musical roles, essentially, that I'm playing around with, depending on how far we are in the film and what's happening on screen. So for the start of the score, and yes, I'm using FL Studio, feel free to roast me in the comments now. We have this very calm beginning where I'm only playing a pad and some piano notes. There's a string coming in, but everything feels very uncertain. You're not exactly sure, after this crazy title card, what exactly is the story, what happened, and you don't see the nature here. So I kind of approached the beginning very carefully, as trying to understand what just happened. So you'll hear that in the score if I can just play it here. And then you'll hear the string slightly dissonant. Yeah, and of course you see when the cells start multiplying, the music also catches up, and you're getting a glimpse of what is happening, because essentially you're watching this new force of nature being born, and which in itself, of course, is a positive thing. In the context of what we saw in the beginning, one might understand that it is more sinister than it might appear. But objectively speaking, it's a new life being born. So the music kind of continues on that illusion for quite a while. The first instance where you see it affecting humanity, though, is with it taking down a chimney, which is, the first sign of an invasion to humanity, essentially, which you can hear right here. And this is also the first time I'm using a heavily distorted synth in the foreground of the music. Yeah, and from that point onwards, that's when the mood starts to change. We saw that chimney being broken down, and now you keep thinking, and it's like, what is going to happen next? The music's kind of slowing down, and at some point, even the beautiful strings that you hear at first, even they start sounding more dissonant and almost synth-like. Everything is kind of starting to melt together. You hear some more synths in the background as you see things getting more and more intimate towards, or like invasive towards humanity, right? You have this very iconic shot of the car being, and then moving on from here, you will be able to tell that the piano is playing a more unsettling melody now. The strings are doing a very interesting thing where they have this like up and down motion, which reminded me of a siren, and that siren is supposed to warn you of what's to come, because now things are getting uncertain. You see this nature being really invasive on humanity, but you haven't seen any trace of the humans themselves yet. I try to support this juxtaposition of like the positivity and this illusion in midst of this like very eerie soundscape that we have created now, with these small innocent piano notes that are also synced to the flower petals that are growing out of this lantern. So with this shot, of course, the entire atmosphere is changing. We see the first human body on screen, whereas before we've only seen, the innocent shots of nature and this new living thing kind of taking over the environment only. And now this is the first depiction of an actual human being stabbed by this force of nature. And I try to accompany that with the music, of course, by fully changing what's happening in the instrumentation. So the grounded and natural instruments are completely gone now. I have muted both the piano and the string section. Pretty much this is almost entirely synthesized sounds now, along with this very pressing heartbeat that is just like accompanying the viewer from now on, and just like constantly pressing down on them. And then you also have something that I kind of added later on because something was missing, which is a women's choir. And to me, this was the closest thing to a musical human scream, if that makes sense. And I felt like it was very fitting in this scenario. And also, a choir has this feeling of like the Last Judgment Day. I felt like it really fit into place here. And yeah, obviously this entire like mood switch was supposed to represent the human shock of seeing something like this, which is why it's even more effective to remove all those very natural instruments and now only play with these synthesized sounds. One of them is this like continuous siren that we had before on the strings. We now have that as a synth, and it sounds a lot more confused, and it's a lot quicker and higher, and it just sounds like a sound you would hear in a meltdown. It's like the sound you would hear in your head if you see something like this. Now, and as the film moves on, you will start to see the natural instrumentation of the piano and the strings slowly coming back. So the piano is coming back in after the heartbeat shot, and we just hear this like very drastic mood change that we had before. We just see that kind of watering down into something more positive again as time goes on. So especially right before you see the flower that is rising here, and it's sourcing the energy of a human body for its own growth, which I also tried to depict in the music, because now we are emulgating the natural instruments and the industrial instruments that I used, and we're kind of combining them into one. We don't hear any of them isolated any longer. So here, things are starting to sound hopeful again. You almost forget about the cruelty that you witnessed a few shots before. And the only thing that the music is kind of focusing on now is the new life that is being born, the new beginning, so to speak. And this very positive note is carrying itself all the way to the end here. And the last sustaining note that you see when you have this huge image here was actually running through a lot of iterations as well, because we weren't quite sure, was this, we had to capture this complex emotion of what you might feel here, because it's objectively speaking for Earth, it's a positive day. We finally got to a state where it felt odd enough where it kind of supports your mind just making this ending your own, and seeing how you see it yourself. So yeah, that was my breakdown for the score of Noxious. I hope this kind of gave you an idea of the decision making and the composition of the score and sound design. And yeah, once again, I'm really thankful for Kai to be able to have worked on such an amazing film, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did.
Thanks, Mikael. After working hours and hours on the remaining shots, the film was eventually finished within the deadline. I graduated, and I even got the film to play at the Dutch Film Festival. But strangely enough, right after all of that, I wanted to completely distance myself from what I had created. When you spend that many months staring at all the details and having to cut shots, the flaws start screaming at you. There are even some shots in there that I absolutely hate, and I was plagued with doubt whether or not the vision of my film would actually come through. I had built up a small audience on X or Twitter of people that were following the technical development of the film, and I was kind of terrified that if I were to release the film, it wouldn't live up to what they were expecting it to be. Or at least that's the narrative that I told myself to justify burying the movie on a hard drive for 2 years. Fast forward to 2026, my friends and I have since co-founded our motion design studio called Dot4, where we create high-end 3D motion design pieces for clients. Working in a collaborative team every day actually made me reflect back on the stuff that I did before that. I opened up my old project archive with Noxious, and I rewatched the film with some fresh eyes. And to my surprise, I actually started to like it again. I finally gathered the courage to upload it on YouTube, and the response has blown me away. I know that in the grand scheme of things, hitting over 1,000 likes on YouTube isn't anything massive, but to me it meant everything. The core goal I had 2 years ago as a student was simply to spark the imagination through a world that I had created. Seeing your comments perfectly reflect what I had hoped for this film fulfilled everything I ever wanted to achieve with this film. Seeing my work connect with the community really got me excited to start creating more and sharing more of my knowledge here on YouTube. I truly hope my journey with this film has inspired someone to just look past the flaws in their project and put it out there. Moving forward, I want to use this channel to actively share my Blender knowledge with you. I am deeply passionate by the mix of art and technical execution, which means geometry nodes and procedural workflows are an element that I often get to execute in my workflow at Dot4. I'm planning to break down some of those technical mechanics, and if there's enough interest, I could also do a step-by-step breakdown on some of the shots inside of Noxious. If that sounds like something you want to explore alongside me, then feel free to subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment on any specific procedural or workflow that you'd like me to explore deeper. And then I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks again for all of those super nice comments. I read all of them, and thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.